He stole my grandfather's will. I confronted him in front of the entire family. The weight of my grandfather's absence was still a raw ache in my chest, but the reading of his will felt like a second, more calculated blow. My uncle, Richard, always a man of veiled smiles and opportunistic glances, stood there, beaming almost imperceptibly. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, a man whose voice usually dripped with measured calmness, suddenly faltered. His eyes darted nervously between me and Richard as he spoke the words that shattered the last semblance of peace in our family. The entire estate, everything, is left to Richard. My heart pounded in my ears. It wasn't just the injustice, it was the sickening certainty that something was terribly, deliberately wrong. Grandpa loved us all, fiercely and equally. There was no reason, no logical explanation, for him to have left everything to Richard while leaving my siblings and me with nothing. A cold wave washed over me, a mixture of disbelief and seething anger I hadn't known I possessed. This wasn't an oversight, this was a heist, and Richard was its architect. The will itself felt like a betrayal, a final twisted act in the ongoing saga of our family's secrets, and I knew, right then and there, I wouldn't let him get away with it. He had stolen more than just money, he had stolen my grandfather's legacy and our family's history. I wouldn't rest until I exposed him. My name is Fallon, and I grew up in the sprawling embrace of my grandfather's old, creaky farmhouse on the edge of Maplewood County. It was a place of endless fields, apple orchards, and family history embedded in every wall. The house, with its countless rooms and dusty corners, was more than just a building, it was the heart of our family. Grandfather, Thomas, was a man whose wisdom was as deep as the roots of the ancient oak tree in the front yard. He had taught me about the land, about loyalty, and the unbreakable bond of family. I was the oldest of 3 siblings, me, my brother Caleb, and my youngest sister, Gemma. We were more than just siblings, we were partners in crime, explorers of the woods, and confidants in each other's secrets. Our lives revolved around the farm, summers were spent picking berries and swimming in the creek, while winters were filled with stories by the fireplace and the smell of freshly baked bread. My parents worked hard, my mom a teacher, and my dad a construction worker who supplemented the farm income, but even with their income, they relied a lot on their grandfather's farm. Richard, my father's younger brother, was the opposite of my grandfather. He always had a sheen of restlessness, an eagerness to be anywhere but here. He was an insurance salesman who always seemed to be on the brink of some big deal, some venture that would finally make him rich. He would come over on the weekends mostly to hang out with Granddad because of the stories, and he would always leave quickly. Grandfather would always say he's a good boy. But we always felt that Uncle Richard was always trying to impress my grandfather. As children, we would see him trying to make him laugh or try to get his attention. Every year our family would come together for our annual Thanksgiving gathering at the farmhouse. It was a tradition we cherished, a time when the old house was filled with laughter, the aroma of roasting turkey, and the warmth of being together. These moments felt sacred, and I always looked forward to them. Little did I know that the foundations of everything we held dear were about to be shaken to their core by the very person who seemed the least likely to betray us. The seeds of discontent had been planted long ago, subtle signs of greed hidden beneath a veneer of family loyalty. My grandfather, Thomas, was the glue that held our family together. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He valued hard work, integrity, and family above all else. He had built his farm from the ground up, and it represented his life's work. He was the reason we had a roof over our heads and food on the table. He always made sure we had what we needed. He was a simple man, but he had an uncanny ability to see through people's masks. My Uncle Richard, on the other hand, was the opposite of my grandfather. He had always been driven by ambition and a thirst for wealth. His life was a constant pursuit of material success and admiration. Richard had always been envious of my grandfather's success and the love he received from us. He felt overlooked, often complaining to my dad about how his grandfather would never acknowledge him. This led to a quiet resentment that brewed beneath the surface. He was a charmer, adept at manipulating situations to his advantage. My brother Caleb was the middle child, a gentle soul who preferred the quiet companionship of nature to the noise of family drama. He was a hard-working man and loved the farm with all his heart. My sister, Gemma, the youngest, was a spirited and artistic soul. She was always the peacemaker, the one who tried to mend any rifts that arose. Gemma was the most emotional and sensitive of us all. Our parents, while loving, had always been somewhat hands-off when it came to the family affairs. They trusted that my grandfather would do what was best. My mom always believed in the best in people while my dad was a simple man, just trying to make ends meet. The tension within our family was subtle, like the silent pull of an undertow, always present but never spoken. There was an unspoken favoritism shown to my brother and sister, with my grandfather leaning on me more often. I remember the night before my grandfather had passed away, he had held my hand and said, "Take care of the rest of them, Fallon." Richard always saw that bond, and it made him envious. Richard's desperation and a history of financial mismanagement had painted a clear picture for those who knew him, a portrait of a man teetering on the brink of ruin. The farm, with its land, livestock, and valuable equipment, was a prize he coveted. This desperate need for wealth, coupled with his long-standing resentment, created a volatile mix that set the stage for the ultimate betrayal. The days following the reading of the will were filled with a quiet rage that burned like a cold fire within me. The injustice felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Richard, now the sole heir, acted as if nothing was amiss, moving into my grandfather's room, going through all of his belongings, and even making changes to the farmhouse. This was our house. This was our heritage. But he acted like he had won the lottery. The first incident was small but significant. Richard started making changes to the farm, selling off equipment that my grandfather had cherished and replacing it with cheaper alternatives. Caleb tried to reason with him, explaining the value of those items and their history, but Richard brushed him off. "I'm the owner now," he had said, a smug grin playing on his lips. "I get to decide what happens to this place." Then came the suspicious activity. I would find Richard late at night, huddled over stacks of papers in the study, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. Once, I walked in to find him hurriedly shoving a folder into a drawer. When I asked what it was, he brushed it off. As tensions escalated, the family gatherings, once filled with laughter and warmth, became strained and uncomfortable. My parents attempted to mediate, but Richard was dismissive of their concerns, always citing the will as the ultimate authority. He started to talk about renovating and adding to the farmhouse. It made me so mad. He never cared for this place. He just wanted to tear it apart. I tried to talk to Richard, but he brushed me off with vague excuses or flat-out denials. "You're just jealous," he once said, his eyes narrowing. "You never liked me, did you, Fallon?" It wasn't jealousy, it was an intense feeling of betrayal. It was also about the family, our home. He didn't care about us. One day, I found a hidden folder under a stack of old bills in a disused drawer in the study. Inside were documents outlining a series of suspicious transactions, large sums of money being transferred from one of my grandfather's accounts to an offshore account that was linked directly to Richard. This was more than just suspicion, it was concrete evidence of his duplicity. As my frustration grew, I started to piece together a timeline of events, noticing patterns in Richard's actions. I discovered he had been spending a lot of time with Mr. Harrison in the weeks leading up to the will reading. Every little thing was making sense now. He had done it all, he had planned this. The truth was like a bitter pill, but I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I started talking to Caleb and Gemma, sharing my suspicions and the evidence I had gathered. At first, they were hesitant to believe that their uncle could do something so vile, but as they looked at the documents and heard my observations, their disbelief slowly turned into a shared sense of betrayal. I had to confront Richard, and the only place to do it was at the upcoming annual family Thanksgiving gathering. He was going to get what he deserved. I was going to show them the monster he truly was. We secretly developed a plan and I took charge. The annual Thanksgiving gathering arrived, and the farmhouse was filled with the usual suspects. The air was thick with false cheer, a fragile veil covering the simmering tension. Richard was in his element, playing the role of the gracious host, directing everyone, almost like he was the head of the family. The table was laden with food, but no one seemed to have an appetite. I stood up, my heart pounding, and cleared my throat. "Before we start this meal," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "there are some things that need to be addressed." Richard's smile faltered, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Fallon, now is not the time," he said smoothly, but there was an edge in his tone. "It's a time of family, of Thanksgiving." "Richard, now is exactly the time," I countered, my gaze locking with his. "This family needs to know the truth." I pulled out the folder with the bank statements and held it up for everyone to see. "I found these documents in Grandpa's study, detailing suspicious transactions from his accounts to an offshore account linked to you, Richard," I announced, my voice resonating in the suddenly silent room. Richard's face paled. "That's ridiculous. These are just numbers, anyone can make those claims," he sputtered, his forced calmness beginning to crack. "Oh, but it gets worse," I continued, the evidence piling up. "I've also spoken to Mr. Harrison. He finally confessed that the will, as doctored, Richard." Mr. Harrison looked down ashamed and tried to hide his face. Richard went pale as a ghost, now he was starting to sweat. I could see my parents were in shock, my brother was glaring at Richard, and Gemma had tears welling in her eyes. I could tell that all the hard work that I did, that all the planning, it was all paying off. He admitted to colluding with Richard, changing the documents that we all saw, to falsely make it look like my grandfather wanted him to have everything. Richard's eyes darted around the room, looking for support, but he was met with faces of shock, disbelief, and betrayal. "That's a lie!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "They're all lies. You're all jealous of me." Caleb slammed his fist on the table, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You disgust me, Richard. Grandpa trusted you. We all did." Gemma, tears streaming down her face, spoke softly, "How could you? How could you betray us like this?" My mother looked at Richard with disbelief, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't believe it, Richard, how can you be so cruel?" My dad just shook his head in shame. He couldn't even look at his brother. I saw all the pain and suffering he caused. Richard stood there, cornered, his carefully constructed facade completely shattered. He tried to deny it, tried to deflect, but the evidence was overwhelming. "I deserved it," he screamed, his voice filled with bitterness. "Grandpa never gave me anything, never saw me. It was always about you, Fallon. You were always his favorite. The farm was supposed to be mine." I stood my ground, unflinching. "It wasn't about favorites, Richard. It was about trust, about love, about family. And you threw all of that away." The room was filled with a heavy silence, the weight of Richard's betrayal hanging in the air. The Thanksgiving feast meant to celebrate family had turned into a battlefield, the scars of this betrayal etched deep into our hearts. With the final pieces of the puzzle in place, and the room filled with understanding, Richard's manipulations were exposed for what they were, a desperate attempt to seize what was never his. His desperation was palpable, and yet, it was met with the coldness of truth. The facade he had maintained crumbled, revealing the petty, envious man underneath. The confrontation reached its peak, the lies all unmasked, and the truth stood starkly in the room, and the family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered trust. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was a chaotic mix of emotions. My parents were in shock, grappling with the reality of their brother's betrayal. There were tearful apologies, quiet reassurances, and a deep sense of shame that washed over us all. Caleb was furious, his rage burning bright. He had always been the one to give Richard the benefit of the doubt, and the betrayal hit him the hardest. Gemma, sensitive as ever, was heartbroken, her faith in family shaken to its core. She found solace in my arms, the two of us seeking comfort in our shared pain. As the initial shock subsided, a quiet anger settled within me. I was angry at Richard for his greed, but I was also angry at myself for not seeing through him sooner. We spent the next few days poring over legal documents, working with lawyers to undo the damage Richard had caused. The real will was finally brought to light, a document that divided the estate equally among my siblings and me. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. The trust that had been shattered would never fully be restored, and the family would forever be marked by this betrayal. The silence at the farmhouse was deafening, the once familiar sounds now tinged with sadness. The house, which had been a symbol of our unity, now seemed to bear the weight of our fractured family. I found myself reflecting on my grandfather's life, his values, and his unwavering belief in the power of family. I remembered his words the night before his passing, "Take care of the rest of them, Fallon." I knew I had a new responsibility to make sure everyone was looked after, but at the same time, I was broken. Richard, on the other hand, was completely isolated. He had lost everything: his family, his reputation, his pride. He was no longer a part of our lives, a painful but necessary severing. I started to see the signs that my parents and siblings were starting to cope. Caleb threw himself into work on the farm, Gemma picked up her drawing pencils again, and Mom even baked her famous pie. It made me smile to see the good side, and it gave me a sense of closure. I was starting to heal. Yet, there was a part of me that felt a sense of sadness for Richard. I knew he was lost, a victim of his greed and resentment. But he had also victimized us. This whole ordeal taught me that family could also be our greatest source of pain and that love can be complicated. I knew the road ahead was long, and that healing would take time, but I also knew that we would emerge from this stronger, more resilient, and more aware of the complexities that bind us together. In the months that followed, we started to rebuild. The legal battles were tedious, but we won them all, securing our rightful inheritance. The farm, once threatened by Richard's greed, was now safe under our care. Caleb took the lead in managing the day-to-day operations, working tirelessly to maintain the legacy that our grandfather had built. Gemma found solace in her art, using her creativity to channel her emotions and create beautiful tributes to our family history. My parents, still reeling from the betrayal, started to pick up the pieces of their shattered faith in their brother. They found a renewed sense of closeness with me and my siblings, realizing the strength of the family bond. As for me, I became the de facto leader of the family. My leadership was a source of strength for my family. I found solace in this, that despite all that happened, we were all okay. I spent time in my grandfather's study, reading his old journals, and learning more about his life and his values. The old house started to feel like home again. We started having small family dinners, nothing big or extravagant like the Thanksgiving gathering. It was like we all needed to heal together and feel safe. The scars of Richard's betrayal remained, but they became a reminder of our resilience and our capacity to overcome adversity. We knew that the family dynamics would never be the same, and there was a part of us that would always carry the weight of the past. Yet, amidst the sadness, there was also a glimmer of hope. We had faced our biggest challenge and we had come out stronger. The farm, now under our control, became a testament to our enduring spirit. We honored my grandfather's memory by continuing his legacy of hard work, integrity, and love for the land. The farmhouse, once a symbol of broken trust, slowly became a symbol of our resilience and our ability to heal and move forward. The story of Richard was a cautionary tale, a reminder that greed can corrupt even the closest of bonds. We decided to never forget but to never let it define us. We had the opportunity to build a new chapter, to write our own story, and we embraced it with renewed vigor. This is my story, the story of how my uncle stole my grandfather's will and how I confronted him in front of the entire family. It was a story of betrayal, greed, and heartbreak, but it was also a story of resilience, strength, and the enduring power of family. I've learned that trust is fragile, and that betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. But I've also learned that we have the strength to overcome even the most difficult challenges, to heal our wounds, and to find our way back to each other. If you have ever experienced betrayal from your family, please know that you are not alone. Healing takes time, but it is possible. We all have the power to rebuild what is broken and to create new bonds of love and trust. If you found my story relatable or helpful, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear your experiences and to know that we are all connected in this journey. Don't forget to hit that like button if you appreciated the story, subscribe to my channel for more stories like this, and remember to always trust your instincts and never let anyone dim your light. Thank you for listening. And remember, family is worth fighting for.